Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 ELO in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. This opening is something that all Caro Kann players need to know, and I know a lot of you watching this video either already play the Caro Kann, or you want to learn more about the Caro Kann to start playing it. This is known as the fantasy variation, where white plays the move f3. It's called the fantasy variation because white's fantasy is that black will take and white will take back, and white will get 2 pawns in the center and black will lose the d5 pawn. White can then continue development very nicely, and it's a very aggressive line for white. It might not look aggressive, it's very aggressive. Now, the main line is take, and e5, and black tries to play for queen to h4 ideas, exploiting the weak diagonal. However, I personally like to play the move e6, and this is also the move that I will recommend. Now, one of the downsides of playing e6 is that you lock in your light squared bishop. And that is a downside, of course, because one of the main points of the Caro Kann, as opposed to the French defense, is that you get the bishop out first, and then you play the move e6. The point of this line, however, is to overprotect the d5 pawn. You don't want to get into any of the shenanigans here. By keeping a d5 pawn, you also stop bishop to c4, so you're in far less danger of any threats on the f7 pawn. And you actually still have some of the queen to h4 ideas, potentially. So we're going to play bishop to b4, and bishop to b4 carries a very sinister threat, because if white plays a move like a3, challenging our bishop, then we can take, and after pawn takes, we can take on e4, and after f takes e4, we can play queen to h4 check, forking the king and the e4 pawn. So my opponent goes bishop to e3. I believe this is one of the main lines. Let me see if I can remember. I think after take, white is not supposed to take back because we will go for this. So I'm pretty sure after taking, the main move is like knight to h3 or something like that. I believe that is the idea. Although we do have play there. So we're going to take, and of course we are setting a trap. This is a trap because we're pinning the knight, and we're trying to exploit this weakness of the e4 pawn and of the diagonal towards the king, because f3 can be a good move supporting the e4 pawn, but also the drawback of f3 is that you weaken this diagonal, which obviously leads straight to your king. And we'll see how my opponent responds to this, because there is a very real possibility that they mess up. I believe there are some other lines that white can play after bishop to b4. I'm not sure if I think knight to h3 immediately might be a line. But again, I'm not entirely sure. I know that in many of these lines, black plays the move queen to a5, trying to apply lots of pressure to this diagonal. And if you can induce a move like bishop to d2, then that's a very passive response from white. So in a lot of these lines, black will actually win a pawn. And then, let's say like queen a5, queen d2. In some of those lines, you can secure a queen trade, which, if you're up a pawn, is fantastic news. My opponent's taking his time on this move, which is, good, because most people who play the fantasy variation are going to spend the vast majority of their time learning what happens after takes, and e5, or take, and knight f6, and those kinds of things, because those lines are incredibly interesting. There's even some lines, I think, where queen b6 gets played, if I remember correctly. However, I like to play in this manner because I think it's deceitfully tricky, or deceptively tricky would be a better word. As in, we are playing a very tricky line. We are trying to set traps for white, and white has to be very careful. But it looks like we're being quite passive. Like this looks like a very passive setup from us, just allowing our bishop to be locked in, and just pinning a knight to his king. That doesn't look all that aggressive. It looks like white can just go for this whenever he wants. But my opponent takes, and I think that is just a straight up blunder. Okay, now let's not rush. Let's not rush, because we have two options here. We have bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and queen to h4 check. Or we have queen to h4 check, and after the king moves, then we decide what we're going to do. However, if we go queen to h4 check, and my opponent plays a move like bishop to f2, of course we can go ahead and take on e4 because the knight is pinned to the king. Fantastic. We're up a pawn, and we should be in very good stead. If queen to h4 g3, we can still go ahead and take on e4 because the knight is still pinned. We may not be checking the king, but we're attacking the bishop and the rook at the same time. And I think white probably has to go queen to f3 in that scenario. In which case, we can maybe even take on c2, to be honest. The one line that I was just unsure about was king to e2, because now the knight is no longer pinned to the king. However, if king e2, I think we can just go ahead and take, and then take. And the light squared bishop can't get out. The bishop's pressured. We're pressuring the pawns. We can go for a move like knight to f6. It's very, very comfortable. We can even maybe try and go e5 to unleash our bishop. But yeah, I think this should show you why I like this e6 line against the fantasy, and hopefully encourage some of you guys to try it out for yourself. I will have some other videos on my channel in the fantasy variation. If you just search up something like Chess Centurion Caro Kann Fantasy, I have some other videos where I play this e6 line, and with relatively good success. I mean, really good success, actually. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, and hopefully this is very useful information for you, I would really appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. The channel is kind of blowing up right now, which is really, really cool. And hopefully we can get to the 10k subscriber mark, I don't know, in like the coming weeks or something. That'd be awesome. So your support would be really appreciated. So yeah, now white has to make a decision. White has several moves. He has bishop to f2, he has g3, he has king e2, he has king d2. Now king d2, I think we can immediately rule out as not very good, because he can no longer castle, and his knight is still pinned, so he's going to lose the e-pawn regardless, and you don't even have bishop d3 there, because I'll just take on g2. And maybe you can go knight to e2 and try to claim you have good development, but I think that's a very weak claim. My opponent chooses bishop to f2, which, to be honest, I think I'm quite happy to see. So we're going to go ahead and take on e4. And I wanted to delay taking on c3 because there's no reason to trade my bishop off preemptively. Or not preemptively. Unprompted. Right? That's a better word. I haven't been prompted to take. Now, if a3 is played, then okay, I will take. Because if a3 bishop to a5, you lose after the move b4. Your bishop's under attack, and your queen is now under attack because the pin is broken. But for now, we can just develop. We can play a very calm move, knight to f6. Your queen is not hanging. You can take this knight whenever you want. My opponent also has no good way to attack my queen. My queen maintains pressure on so many things in the position. There is no knight to c3 attacking my queen, because of course the knight is pinned. There is no bishop to d3 attacking my queen, because the knight is in the way. There is no pawn to f3, because there is no f-pawn. So this is very uncomfortable for white, because the question is, he's down a pawn. Okay, that's not the end of the world. He can claim he's got decent development, which I would say it's not all that impressive, considering the quality of the development. However, being down one pawn isn't the end of the world. If this bishop were able to teleport to the d3 square in this situation, or no, okay, let's say the f3 square, then maybe white can say, okay, I have a little bit of compensation here, let's see what I can do with it. Here, not so much the case. And my opponent plays queen to d2. Queen d2 should be clear what the intention is, to break the pin, threaten knight takes e4, which is a threat, because if knight e4, bishop d2, the knight takes back, so I don't have knight e4 at the end of the line, and I'm down a piece. So I can't do that. The easiest move to play would be bishop takes c3, and probably queen takes to avoid doubling the pawns, preparing long castle. I can play a move like knight d5 there, hitting the queen. That looks relatively nice. I could also play a move like queen... Okay, maybe not queen g6 because of knight to f4. Maybe a move like queen to g4, just getting out of the way and preparing the move knight to e4, forking like everything. That's an interesting idea. I'd like to go queen to f5 to keep pressure on the bishop, but I think my opponent has knight g3 there. Yeah, that doesn't quite work. If I do play queen g4 and knight g3 is played regardless, though, I don't have knight to e4 anyway. So I think it might actually be better just to take the knight, maintain this pin because it's stopping white's development, and then, yeah, knight to d5 looks pretty nice, just hitting the queen and centralizing the knight. We can maybe put the knight on b4 and try to exploit the weak c2 square, and if white castles, maybe even a2 in some lines. So that could be interesting. If white offers me a queen trade with a move like queen to f3, what would you do in that situation? Would you accept the queen trade, or would you keep the queens on the board? Well, there's an argument for both, really, because first instinct would be, oh yes, please, queen trade, I'm up a pawn, fantastic. But your development isn't all that good, and your queen is clearly your best piece. Furthermore, after queen to f3, you can probably just go ahead and pick up the c2 pawn, stopping white from castling, and you're applying pressure to b2, which is very frustrating for white to deal with. And then you're up 2 pawns. And then if you trade queens up 2 pawns, then it should be completely winning, right? Being up 1 pawn isn't necessarily a win if your opponent can generate good enough counterplay. Although, admittedly, our pawn structure, the classic Caro Kann pawn structure, is so solid that it would be very difficult for white to really exploit my position. Downside of my position is my bishop sucks. So, what are we going to do? Well, it's unclear what the best plan of action is. I think it's clear that white is going to castle queenside. I think that's obvious. We could castle kingside here, which I don't actually see a problem with. But let's not rush the move. I think what's nice about this position as well is, amongst other things, is if white castles queenside and tries to move his knight and prepare bishop to d3, we always have a very nice move. See if you can find it. Queen f4, I think, is really nice because the knight loses control over f4, and we force a queen trade because the queen is pinned to the king, and there's no bishop to e3 because we control that square twice. So I think that's a very nice part of the position that makes this easier to play. I think I want to develop this knight first. There is an argument to be made for b6 and bringing the bishop out to a6, which also does look like a good idea. We could develop this knight, though. I do like this, actually. No, I'm going to go b6. It'll be interesting to see what the computer thinks of this move during the post-game analysis, but this looks very natural to me because this is clearly my worst piece, even, by a country mile. Again, I did say right at the start of the game, e6 is a concession, in part because this bishop can't get out properly, which is what the Caro Kann tries to avoid, as opposed to the French defense. So by playing b6, we are now trying to liberate the bishop, which this is actually a common motif in the French defense. I think that if you play the Caro Kann, learning some ideas in the French might be a good idea. And if you play the French, learning some Caro Kann ideas might be a good idea as well, because whilst the openings are different, you will often find, well, sometimes they even transpose with each other, but a lot of the time the ideas will transpose because the goal is effectively the same. Whether via c6 or e6, it's to play the move d5 against d4, supported by another pawn on the light squares. It's the exact same concept, but done in a different manner. But okay, enough rambling. b6 on the board. Preparing bishop to a6. I wanted to do this before developing the knight because I like the fact my knight protects the a6 square. My opponent castles queenside. I think that bishop to a6 makes an awful lot of sense, just applying pressure to the knight, getting my bishop out. And again, knight to g3 looks good for white, hitting my queen, hitting my bishop. But I think we just have queen to f4, which should be a very nice move, which I'm going to play. Supported by the knight, we force the queens off the board. Bishop e3 is unplayable. These bishops will probably get traded in some manner. We are also preparing the move c5 in the future, potentially, although this bishop is annoying currently, stopping it. But let's say we go knight d7, bishop, and rook to c8, then c5 is very much on the cards, because take, 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 and rook takes, not pawn takes, because I don't want to ruin my pawn structure like that. I don't want an isolated c-pawn, but rook takes, and, you know, that will be very nice. We'll have a passed e-pawn in that line if we can get rid of the d-pawn, because there's no f-pawn and no e-pawn for white. So the extra pawn would be a very strong extra pawn in that scenario. I think my opponent missed the idea of queen to f4, which is a very strong idea. Because, like, if I do other things, like, I don't know, queen g4, then, like, h3, I don't know, queen g6, and there is no bishop d3 because I, of course, control that square, so that's okay. But these types of ideas exist and make my life a bit annoying. If white can come forward with tempo while attacking my queen, that would be a very strong initiative for white. However, with the move queen to f4, white loses any attacking ideas he could possibly have because he cannot avoid the queen trade. It's impossible to avoid it. And I'm going to trade off his better bishop. So, okay, queen takes. Let's take back with the knight. Knight e4 is a good move. Trying to play knight to d6. I can consider taking and taking. Because, to be honest, knight d6 poses no threat. Like, I'll just go king e7, and, like, where's your knight going? Now, if I do take, though, after, let's say, rook takes, if I do take on g2, then there is rook to g1, which is annoying. Therefore, I'm leaning towards castling, so that if I do go for that line, the g7 pawn doesn't hang, although maybe there's, like, knight to f6 in conjunction with rook to g1, but then I just shift my king, and, like, your knight's under attack, so that's okay as well. Opponent's creating decent counterplay, though. It should also be noted that if bishop takes here, after the rook takes, I do have knight to e2 with check, because the bishop no longer defends that square. Of course, I don't see anything useful just yet, but it's worth noting. I think castling is a very good move, which I'm going to play. Very solid. I don't have to go after this g2 pawn. I also don't have to take this bishop yet, because I'll be very happy if my opponent takes my bishop and allows my knight to develop while capturing the bishop, right? I'd rather not take here and allow him to put his rook on a better square while capturing. It's like trading on your own terms, right? And white can't do a whole lot to avoid the trade. He could play c4, admittedly. However, c4 doesn't look all that good, to be honest, because this pawn looks more like a liability than a strength. Although that might be a decent idea for him to play, but I'm not all that concerned. I mean, like, c4, I don't know, knight d7, that looks fine. No issues there. And we can maybe prepare c5. This knight is a little bit annoying, admittedly, but it's really not the end of the world. A move like bishop to g3. Worst case scenario, we can just come back to d5. We can also take. Although I would probably avoid maybe... Okay, I would avoid that position because it would be an opposite coloured bishop position. And yes, there's more pieces on the board, so it shouldn't be a draw, but, like, there's potential. However, in that specific line, we have bishop takes g2 at the end of the line, forking the rook and the knight. So we win an extra pawn, and we can trade our bishop off for the knight, and knight versus bishop up 2 pawns should be winning. My opponent takes on a6, which I think is a significant inaccuracy. I think a very significant inaccuracy. There was no need to allow that. g3 doesn't really do anything. If I go knight to e2, then my knight just gets trapped. So don't play a move just because it gives the cool check sound. Knight d5 is perfectly reasonable. Knight g6 is reasonable, although our knight is dominated by my opponent's pawns, so it's a little bit stuck. We could go knight to h5, preparing this, but on d5 we also prepare knight to f6 anyway. Now, do I actually want to trade the knights off and double my pawns? I don't know. Okay, h4, that's fine. I'm not even going to engage with that. Let's just play rook to d8. Of course, eyeing up this pawn, stopping knight d6 ideas. My opponent can do that. I don't care that much. Probably h6. And if g4... Is that concerning? I don't know. f5, that seems like a bad move. If I allow h6 and go g6, are the dark squares concerning? I think so. It seems unnecessary to allow that. g4 looks like the move. And then maybe knight to f6 is a good shout. And if we get this trade, well, then that's actually quite a good trade. I think that's actually really smart. Because white, yeah, has to go for this trade. He can go bishop e3 targeting h6, but I just go king g7 defending both my pawns. And now, or he can do it this way, doesn't matter. Oh, wait. Does he just have rook here? Well, not that rook, because I'll win this. Although then there's this. Oh, that's actually quite smart. That's really annoying, because this is pinned. King g7. Rook f1. I literally can't defend this pawn. That's a really cool idea. Maybe I... no, because then this comes with check. I should probably let the pawn go. Which I really don't want to do. I could try knight b4. Hitting a2. And if a3, knight to d5 defending. Although there is just c4 in that line. Kicking my knight away. And I can go knight to e3. But after a move like rook... well, no. If rook e1, I have this. But like, if rook to d2... sorry, d3... if I take here, I get pinned, and then I'd have to play f5 and lose the exchange. Huh. Rook d5 might be the best bet. Just getting my rook out of the way. Allowing him to take this pawn. And then... it's a really good bishop, though. A really strong bishop. Maybe c5 is the best option. Trying to break apart the center. And if take, then our knight gets into the game. Bishop takes. Still not good, though. Because d8 is under attack. Not a fan of this. Not a fan of this. Maybe king h7. And then, like, rook g8. But then f7 is incredibly weak. This doesn't seem to help me. No, this is a very, very good bit of counterplay from my opponent that I have completely missed. Completely misevaluated. E5 is an interesting idea. Trying to get takes, and takes, so there's no longer any pin. But I think this pawn still falls, to be honest. And also there's rook to d7, which is incredibly uncomfortable. And also after e5, my opponent can just take. And after take, something like take, that's not really any good. Again, knight b4. If this, then I have this. But then after king to b1, my rook and my knight are both under attack. So that's also no good. My rook can't move with an attack on the bishop either. So the most principled thing might be rook to d5. If c4... well, then there's potential weakness. Although my rook still doesn't have any good squares. I mean, like, rook a5, bishop f6. If the knight comes in, it's just a3, so that doesn't help. I think c5 is going to be my best bet. I think this is going to be my best bet. A really good job of creating counterplay there from my opponent, which I really shouldn't have allowed. Could I have done a better job of disallowing it? Maybe I could have played h5 here. That might have worked. Yeah, it just sucks a bit, doesn't it? Wait, if I do this, is the c4? Probably. Nah, this is horrible. This is horrible. Here, c4. Rook d7. Take. Take. If b4. Then I have knight e4. That's okay. Okay, I always have knight e4 with an attack on the bishop, which is useful. Okay. Let's go rook d5. I mean, this is horrific, don't get me wrong, but I'm thinking if takes, I can maybe do this and try and generate some counterplay on the c file. Now, maybe c3 just stops my attack in its tracks. Maybe bishop c3 stops my attack, but okay, he does take. So I have a couple of options. This seems to make little sense because this trade leaves me with an isolated d-pawn, which is basically impossible to defend after rook to d1 because I don't have rook d8. Therefore, that's out of the question. So I should probably, well, either take here or do this, right? But I think keeping more pieces on the board is probably the best shout. So rook c5 is what I'm going to play. Knight to b4 is a threat of a fork, which is useful. I also, by opening up the c file, I diminish the issue of my rook not being able to come to d8 because I provide it a source of activity with rook a to c8 because we have an open c file. Whereas if I were to have left my pawn on c6, after something like rook d5, bishop to f6, my rook has no form, like no way to get into the game unless c5 is played and the c file is opened up because I don't have access to the d file. So I hope that makes sense. We're certainly not losing here, but I think white is probably better because in these types of positions with pawns on both sides of the board, it should favor the side with the bishop over the knight because the bishop can watch both sides of the board at the same time and move very quickly to either side of the board. My knight cannot. So, okay. Knight b4 is a very interesting move. Of course, king to b1 means I'm no longer attacking a2 with, like, an actual threat. But I like the idea, potentially, of c3 and knight to d5, putting my knight on the d5 square, where it's actually very active. I like that, yeah, I like that. I'm expecting the move c3. If bishop to c3, that's even better. Knight d5 threatens to win a pawn. Okay, rook d2 is also fine. I could even double up. But I think knight to like here is perfectly reasonable. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Because rook ac8, I'm not actually threatening anything. Because if I take, and take, then there's just a3. And maybe I have rook to f2, but then there's like bishop to h4. And the problem is both of my pieces will be hanging. And if I go rook here and we... Okay, maybe knight takes works, to be fair. Okay, bishop back to h4. Unexpected. I didn't think that's where he wanted his bishop, but okay. Maybe he's trying to play g5. Alright, alright. Knight e3 is interesting. Putting pressure on g4, opening up my rook's defense of g5. If rook to g1, preparing g5. Rook c8, threatening c2. If c3. Maybe I have knight to c4. Don't know. Don't know. Oh, he's also stopping me from using the d file. I suppose I would have threats of knight to c3, picking up the rook. Oh, have I just blundered? Okay, I'm actually very lucky because I have the move knight to c4, hitting the rook. And if takes, I can take with check. And I'm okay. Is there rook d4? If rook to e5, then probably rook here. But then I have knight c4 anyway. And I'm defending and attacking. Oh, wait, no, maybe there's rook to e2. Although I'm still defending. Is there a problem with knight c4 immediately? Rook d4. Rook c8? Dunno. Rook e5. Rook e2. Oh, wait, no, I have knight g4 there. Yeah, that's actually really strong. Because I win the pawn, and I defend the rook, and I attack the bishop. Yeah, no, this is good, isn't it? You don't have this because I do this. And you don't have this because the bishop's in the way. I think this is good. Also f5 if I really need it. I think white just blundered. And maybe handing me back the initiative. This is why, even when you get yourself into bad positions, or even losing positions, don't give up. Keep posing threats. Keep asking your opponent questions, right? As in question, like here, playing knight to e... Well, no, not e3 necessarily, but playing rook to e5. I'm asking the question, like, how are you going to deal with this? Are you going to take me? Are you going to go rook to e2? Are you going to go rook to e1? What are you going to do? And I think he chose the wrong move with rook to e2. Even though it looked like the most natural move, I think knight g4 is just an issue because initially it looks like I can't do this because of rook to g1. But your rook is hanging. That's the problem. And this rook doesn't have access to g2. And if you play a move like rook to d2, to be honest, I'm not sure I would actually take the bishop. I think f5 might be stronger because my knight's on a light square. It's not accessible to my opponent's bishop. So, yeah, let's just take. My opponent goes for the trade. If rook to g1, I still have to be careful. Yeah, I do still have to be careful. I think, well, no, f5 rook here. Maybe I should... Oh, no, I don't have rook d8. He's taking this away from me, which is a good idea. Because then I have back rank threats, and I have rook to d2 ideas. So my opponent maintains... Well, good play. I think king h7 makes a lot of sense. Just stepping off of the g file. Also, I'm preparing to use the g file myself. If I can secure a rook trade, I should be winning because I've got connected passed pawns. And the h-pawn is stuck on a light square, making it near impossible to defend for white. The connected passes will be brutal. In any endgame. So the question is, can I get my rook into the game, basically? My knight's in the game. My knight can do various things. Okay, that's an interesting move. Let's just go rook to g8. I think that's clearly a good move. Also, I'm keeping my rook and my king on light squares. Ideally, I will also put this knight on a light square at some point so that it's not vulnerable to this bishop. There is also... King d2 is a very dubious move for several reasons. One, knight to f3 is an idea. and 2 rook to g2 is an idea. Okay, there we go. I think I have f5, preparing knight g4, because I'm setting, I think, a trap of rook to e1, knight to f3, forking the pieces. So that looks like it works. If bishop to f6, then just knight g4 hitting the bishop. And again, I'm preparing to advance. If I can get these pawns, like, further up the board, it'll be very, very strong. And also, I think my opponent has just blundered knight to f3. Also, this would be a threat of mate, because the knight is covering d2. Now, the question is, do we take the bishop, or do we get a rook trade? I think a rook trade is better. We don't have to rush the decision, though. We don't have to rush the decision. We could play a move like rook g2. Just apply pressure. No, let's just go for a rook trade. My knight can get out very easily, and my pawns are not particularly vulnerable. I think that should be okay. There's still no king d2 because of this, and you can't do that because I pick up the bishop. Awesome. That was a little bit of a trap that I was setting, because the easiest way it seemed to go after these pawns was to get the bishop to the b8 square. Interestingly, the computer does not approve of this move. Does it want rook g2? No. Does it want e5? Yeah. Does it want f4? Also, yeah. Okay. Well, I think the opening was incredibly strong. I was really, really happy with the opening. The middle game, we let it slip a bit, but we brought it back in the end game. And sometimes that's just chess. So let's get into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Also, we've hit 2000 ELO. So, what do we do now? Okay, so that was a bit of a nuts game. My opponent with 72% accuracy and myself with 77.9. There's a lot of misses that game. But, let me flip the board real quick. The opening went very well. Again, this is known as the fantasy variation. One of the best lines for white against the Caro Kann. And what the main line is basically take, e5. You can't take because of queen to h4 check. And you have to go king d2. Otherwise, you know, this is pretty bad because we're hitting the rook and the king. So main line continues like knight f3, bishop g4, bishop c4, threatening. Let's say you play a move like knight to f6, then you lose because of this. And you check the king and you open up the attack on the bishop. So like king e8, take. White is completely winning, up 2 pawns. I don't want any of that. So I play e6, my opponent goes knight c3, and I go bishop to b4. If my opponent plays a move like a3 here, then we're going to do this and do this, right? And if like the king moves, then we'll take on e4, and we'll beat up a pawn, and white can't castle. My opponent went bishop to e3, which is an inaccuracy. The best line is bishop to d2 or pawn e5. Removing the weak pawn from the board. In which case, we can play a move like c5 and play it kind of like an advanced Caro Kann. Except white's wasted a move on f3, but our bishop can't get out. And also the knight's a bit misplaced. But bishop e3, de4, fe4, queen h4, bishop f2 is a mistake. Yeah, so king d2 is the best move, apparently. And if queen e4... bishop d3, yeah, I actually spoke about this line. This is the exact line that I pointed to. And I was like, maybe white can generate some counterplay here. Computer thinks so. But as a human, hard to play. My opponent spent a couple minutes and went bishop to f2. I take on e4, knight to e2, knight to f6. Okay, apparently taking here is better to double up the pawns, and then knight to f6. But I think this is also very reasonable. Queen d2. Okay, taking is an inaccuracy, apparently. The best move is queen g6, just getting out of the position. And if knight to f4, then queen to h6. Okay, I suppose bishop e3, we have knight g4, so that's not a problem. But yeah, really interesting. Taking is not the best. Knight d5, queen d2. b6 is a mistake because of c4. I mean, I saw this move, but I didn't think all that much of it. And then just queenside castle anyway, which is kind of nuts. But my opponent castled. I went bishop a6. Computer really wants c4 here, which I pointed out in a couple of positions, but he misses it. I go queen f4, which is the only move. If I play a move like queen g6, again, c4 is the problem. Queen f4, knight f4, again, c4 should be played. But my opponent put the knight on e4. Here, I apparently should be taking, but I castle, bishop a6, knight a6, g3. And here, knight h3 is the move it wants. Which just looks so unnatural, because the knight can't get out, but apparently it's fine. Which is, oh, knight b4. And then if this, then knight d5. Okay, that makes sense. And if like bishop to c1, he wants f5. Just wants to attack. But that's not the way the game went. I put my knight on d5, h4. Here I should be playing h5. I went rook after d8, which is not a good move. I should have shut down the counterplay quicker. h5, then I go h6, g4. Here, knight f6 is just a complete mistake. The best move is f5, which looks unnatural. However, white has no choice but to trade. If he moves his knight, then I'll take here. And sure, e6 is weak, but you're down 2 pawns now. So that does make sense in retrospect. However, I thought this was fine, because any move other than bishop to h4, I'm kind of just fine. Like, let's say like bishop to e3. This is what I was thinking. I was like, okay, just king g7. If the rook comes to g1, then I can play a move like rook to d5 maybe. There is c4, which the computer likes, but that kind of thing, and I should be okay. b5. Oh, that makes sense. And let's say like c3, then rook d5, there's no c4. You're never playing g5. And I was like, well, this is perfect. However, I completely missed the move bishop to h4. And interestingly, the best move is still knight to b4. But what I couldn't figure out was after a3, knight d5, c4. Here I go knight to e3. And on rook d3. Oh, I'm supposed to take and go f5. See, I actually did see this line, but I discarded it because I thought it's not worth going down the exchange. Although I do have 2 pawns in compensation. Maybe this is a good idea. So, very interesting. Very interesting. I chose c5, though. Bishop f6, rook d5. And my opponent plays a slightly inaccurate move. I take with the rook because I figured it was the best chance of counterplay. Computer wants knight takes, but I thought that after take and rook d1, I was completely busted. It does find knight to e4 attacking the bishop. And if the bishop maintains control of the diagonal, it thinks after this I can hold. Okay, very intricate. Very intricate. And this doesn't work because I will just take and I'm fine. And f5, and maybe I'm even better, although there is rook d7. Anyway, I do this. King b1, knight b4, which is the best move. And after rook d2, knight d5, I'm getting back into the game. Bishop to h4, trying to hold on to the d8 square. Knight e3 is an inaccuracy because of bishop to f2, which I missed. I was thinking more about rook to g1. And I thought I had, some chances here. There's rook to c4, pinning the pawn. But bishop to f2. And here I go rook to e5. Knight to c4 was playable. I think rook to e2, and I just wasn't that happy with the position. Computer wants to trade a pair of rooks, which apparently favors me. Rook g1. Interesting. But I went rook e5, and I set the trap, which my opponent fell into. And sometimes it does just take a trap or two. Take on g4. There's nothing better than rook takes e5, because if you play a move like rook d2, I can go ahead and take. And with the connected passes and the weakness of h5, I'm up 1 pawn, but it feels like I'm up 2 pawns because these pawns will take forever to get going over here. So the computer likes just rook c8, probably trying to lift the rook to c5. Yeah. So if like b3, preparing c4, I do something like this, and the rook gets tied down, and like this is so hard to defend for white because my rooks are active, h5 is so weak, and I have connected passes. So he takes on e5, the only option. Knight e5, bishop h4, which is a mistake. King h7 is a miss, f5 was better. I rejected this on the basis of rook to e1, but there is still knight to e3, which I played later on. So I should have been... I should have trusted myself a bit more, but I was low on time. I chose king h7, king c1, rook g8, rook f1, and I go f5 at last, which the computer wanted many moves ago. Rook e1, of course, blunders knight to f3. Now, what else could white have done? He could have played a move like rook to d1, trying to infiltrate potentially. There's not much play, though. I mean, I can play a move like rook to g2, and, like, the white position is not happy. My knight is doing a great job of defending. If I move like bishop to f6, I apparently have knight g4, and if the rook checks, king g8, check, king f8, bishop c3, and then I can just keep pushing, which does make sense. Yeah, these pawns are just so strong. But rook e1, of course, blunders knight f3, and after rook to h1, pause the video, try and find the best move for black. The best move is king g7. And after bishop to f2, king f6, the computer just wants to get the king into the game and believes it should be an easy conversion, which makes sense, but is also a very inhuman way to play. But of course, the machine is not human. I also considered knight takes h4. However, I believed that it was unnecessary, but the computer finds the nice rook to d8, cutting the king off. And after rook a4, rook d7, let's say c4, I can bring my king into the game, maybe even get myself to g5 to go after the h5 pawn, and my connected passes should be winning. However, I thought it was easier to trade the rooks. The computer doesn't think so. It thinks that the bishop has a good chance of holding, which the computer can say it's minus 0.6, but like practically, I think this is almost winning for black. I mean, like, I don't know, c4, knight f3, let's say bishop to f6, king to g8, b4, king f7, bishop c3. This is already lost, apparently, and I thought bishop c3 was the most natural-looking move. The only move... Try and find the only move. There's one move for white that doesn't lose. There's one single move, and it's bishop h8. I mean, come on. Who's playing that? Who's playing that? And still, I'm better, so... I think practically this endgame is still completely winning for black, although the computer found a better way to do it. Of course, my opponent blundered bishop g3, knight to e2 check. Similarly, you couldn't have gone for this because of knight to f3 check. Knights are tricky. My opponent blunders. We hit 2000 ELO. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see another video where I play against the fantasy variation of the Caro Kann, which this is the fantasy, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, how we got all the way to 2000 ELO, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what we should be doing next on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.